Welcome to the Physician Wealth Med podcast. It's wealth medicine for doctors. If you're a doctor and you have no time, it looks like you found us just in time. This podcast is for all doctors who would like to work on their personal wealth, but do not have traditional hours to do so because they have no time. We're here to jump into topics that will help you address your wealth both inside and outside of your practice so that you can live the life of significance you're dreaming of. You'll hear from your peers, you'll hear from industry professionals, and your host and wealth advisor, me, Kevin Sullivan. This is your time. Now let's get started with today's podcast. Welcome to Physician Wealth Med podcast. We call it Wealth Medicine for Doctors. We are so excited to be with you here today. We've got Paul Dillon, who's an attorney up in Maine, that is with us today. He's going to share some great insights about estate planning and what he does and why it's important to physicians. For those who don't know me, I'm a financial advisor. I've been in the wealth industry since 1989. We've got clients in 14 different states. I'm also the author of the book, Managing Income in Retirement, Planning with Purpose. So that makes me a financial author too as well. In this show, as you know, we can't make any recommendations without knowing your personal situation, but the educational content here is designed for doctors specifically, so that it would spark a conversation, get you thinking a little bit, and most importantly, have this information delivered to you on your time when you have time to review this type of information. So we're very happy today to have Paul Dillon, attorney, with us, coming from Corinth, Maine. His website is pauldillonlaw.com. You can check that out, and he'll have an opportunity at the end to give you his contact information too as well. But with over 41 years of experience, we're going to pack this into like a 30-minute podcast for you today to give you some things to think about. So welcome, Paul. I appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, sir. Well, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do for your clients, and maybe what it looks like to be a client.
Well, so I've been practicing law for 41 years, but I started late. Before that, I was in business. I worked in radio and television. I did other things, and then brought that to my practice in terms of dealing with individuals, dealing with people, and skills. And when people come to my office, we have a conversation. That's the biggest thing. We talk about what are their goals, what are their concerns, fears, expectations. And the biggest thing with physicians is if I can get their attention for 2 hours, no cell phones, no interruptions, we can have a conversation. I have my 4x8 whiteboard in my office, and we outline their lives, what they expect, what they're afraid will happen. And then from there, we can design a plan that will fit their needs. And that's our basic premise. So when people come to see me, it's a conversation, and it's low key, and they're going to understand positives and negatives about what their opportunities are or their ability to plan.
That is excellent. And I know in the realm of professionalism, especially when you're dealing with clients' money in their estate and their thought process and things, it's very important. And you have this on your website that says you make very complex financial issues very easy to understand. And that is a home run, before you even get started, because I get that a lot when clients say that about me. They say, that you have a way to navigate through the complexity and make it understandable. Nobody cares how technical that we want to be. They just want to make sure that it pertains to them and that they can understand what they're doing. Most importantly, why they're doing what they're doing. Exactly. And I know the clients that you've worked on for us, they're so pleased at the time that you took with them to go through the process, to get their ideas out of their head and put it on paper. So that's huge.
Yeah, and I think I try to make the point that I'm not dumbing down the information. I'm giving them, as you do, I'm giving the accurate information in an explanation that they can understand. Because my goal is not to have it go over their heads and their eyes glaze over and they don't understand. My goal is I want them to understand. Questions are good.
So why would physicians benefit from the type of work that you do?
One of the basic things is physicians are people as well as being physicians. And so doing planning, as I'm thinking, is majority of it is people planning. So dealing with themselves, with their families, with their children, if they have children, what's going to happen with their practices. and how their practices should be set up while they're living, and make provision for something tragic happens if they get sick or die. What steps can be taken to preserve assets for their families going forward. They've worked hard and to get where they are, and we want to be sure that they and their families can benefit from their hard work.
Right. And we were talking initially when we were first discussing this podcast about the specialty skills that the physician has. And should something happen to them, how would their practice continue when they have such a specialty? And you yank them out of the picture. And I think a lot of times with younger physicians, they might think, well, that's later on. This is what I'm working with. I'm trying to stay ahead of my student loans or I'm trying to, stay ahead and grow my practice. So why should I be thinking about doing this thing now, maybe in your 30s or your 40s?
Right. And part of that is, as part of the planning, we're talking about, I guess we call it whole planning, where we're not just looking at what happens when they die. We're looking at how do they establish their practice initially. So, for example, a typical situation, somebody coming out of school sets up a practice. They want to have an entity. And Kevin, that part of this is it's all team effort. So we've got a lawyer, we've got a financial advisor such as yourself, we have an accountant, so that people know all that they bring to the table all of their special skills to help the doctors and physicians, get their goals accomplished. So when they're coming out, they're going to set up an entity for their practice. And that practice entity is going to hire them as an employee typically. And then if they have assets in their practice, they're going to own those by a separate entity, which will then lease it to the practice. Why? These are layers for asset protection in addition to planning. And so that's just getting started, how they're going to do that. Now, if somebody goes into practice with another physician, they're going to want to have some type of buy-sell agreement between the two of them. If something happens to one of them, the last thing they need is for a widow to step in and say, I want my share of the practice and I want it right now. And without anything in writing or something in place, that could easily happen. So one thing I thought of, Kevin, that you just alluded to, a lot of the physicians are coming out of school heavily with student debt. Something that they could do at an early age in conjunction with an attorney like myself and a financial planner like you is create an irrevocable life insurance trust that can hold a large life insurance policy that, because of their age and their health at the time when they're getting started, they can probably put aside that policy so that if at their death there was still student loan debt to pay, or if that's all paid off, then they'd have funds to take care of their families. But starting when they're younger, clearly their health would be better, their age would be more advantageous, and the ability to get a good policy would fit as part of the plan.
Excellent point. It's never too soon. Today is the day. I mean, you hear that said a lot of times, but the younger you are, the more planning that you can do. Like you said, just maybe capturing them for 1 hour or 2 hours of your time. You'll be so thankful that you've set aside some time to get some planning done, because after that comes peace of mind. When you do that type of thing. I remember when I first got in the business, I had an ad go into one of the little newspapers locally. It said, so you're 30 or 40 years away from retirement. Phew, I just caught you just in time. Same kind of thing with your planning, because you never know what roadblocks are going to come in along the way. You never know what kind of thing is going to shake you up. And if you can do these type of things when you're young and you have the medical ability to qualify for these types of programs at a young age, it's just planning all the way around is excellent.
Correct. And there are certain ways to establish that irrevocable trust and the life insurance so that it maximizes the benefit to the physician's family and to their needs. A younger physician, even just getting started at a minimum, should have a financial power of attorney, a healthcare directive, or a healthcare surrogate, whatever it's called. And that's the other thing to keep in mind. I'm giving general information that's going to be state specific to particular situations and what's done, whether it's a separate property state, for example, or a community property state, or how things are established. But essentially, you're looking at a minimum of a will, power of attorney, and a healthcare directive. And in the will, you're going to leave your things, but also if you have young children, you're going to be able to appoint guardians to take care of those children if the other parent is also gone. So that avoids the state determining where assets are going to go upon a person's death, because if you do not have a will, every state in the country has a statute that decides where it's going to go. And a lot of times that's not where the client wishes it to go. For example, in Maine, if a person dies without a will and they have a spouse and children, the spouse gets half and the children get half. And so that could cause tremendous issues.
Especially with blended families and things that you might have forgotten, all of those issues that come with it. It's been said, I've often said this too, is a will is a document that says, please, Mr. Judge, this is how I'd like to have things go down. But a trust gives you a little bit extra security into that says, I don't care what kind of mood you're in, this is how it's going to play out. So that kind of planning can really make a difference. So could you speak to the differences maybe between a will and a trust for our listeners?
Sure. So a will is a document that the individual will create that designates who's going to be in charge of their estate when they're gone and where things go. And essentially what a probate estate consists of is what is in an individual's name at their death. So if they have beneficiary designations on life insurance or retirement accounts, those go directly. They do not go through the will. A trust, the other thing about a will is that it has to go through probate. Probate is the process in every state that allows the will to be turned on, if you will, so that it's effective, and get the personal representative, what we used to call the executor, in charge of the will and carrying out the instructions and the fiduciary duties of the personal representative. The issue with a will alone is that it's public. Wills have always been public, but you at least had to go to the local courthouse or the city hall, wherever it is that wills are probated in that state, to look at them. Now, for example, in Maine, and I'm sure in many states around the country, we can go on a site called mainprobate.net and we can look at everybody's wills online. And so people can see your family, they can see, who got what and what types of things happen. A trust, if you think of a trust like a bucket, and so that bucket is created after discussing all the wishes. And then the best way to do it is to create the bucket, what we would call a revocable living trust, meaning it can be changed. You're in complete control while you're living and healthy. It's created while you're alive rather than at your death in your will. And it's a trust which then holds assets that you assign to it either during your lifetime or at your death by beneficiary. What that allows us to do is keep everything private, because in most states, trusts are not published, put specific and explicit instructions how your family is going to be dealt with. And also in this situation, allowing for the appointment of another professional, another licensed physician who is in a position to handle the settling of the estate as it involves the practice. In Maine, you cannot be an unlicensed individual and deal with a practice. So in our planning, we designate a backup physician, somebody who's licensed, who will step in, handle that part of it. You can have somebody else act as your trustee for the rest of it, but that way it's covered. And the same way with setting up your entities, having it so that a professional is a backup to being in control. And also with financial powers of attorney, designating specifically, yes, I want my wife or my spouse to be in charge of my financial affairs, except as they relate to my medical practice, I'm appointing Dr. So-and-so.
That's a great point. And I hope physicians take note of that because of that specialty, that you have to do in that regard. It's amazing how many high profile celebrities and entertainers that didn't have a will through time, right? We can all think of a few of those. Number one, Elvis, but there's been many more since then. And you would think with the money that they have that they would have done all the planning in the world, So no estate is so big or small that you shouldn't be, or just pushing this aside. You should do it anyway, as far as that goes. And I think it's important to, we've all heard some horror stories. I remember when I worked for the banks in the investment department, we heard horror stories of people that had the trust set up, but they never funded it. So when someone passes away, they thought they were going to have all of these benefits. And I had people coming into the bank and the conference table that we were at, just literally in tears, weeping because of all the money now they're going to have to pay in taxes that they thought they were going to be able to use for their children's education funds. But they had trusts, but they weren't funded. They didn't take time to put some furniture in the house or put some water in the bucket, as you just alluded to. Do you have a couple of stories like that, or maybe something that jumps out at you of maybe when the planning went wrong and they didn't follow through or something like that?
Well, in my situation, I now always make sure that the funding gets done. And the reason for that is, as part of my practice here in rural Maine, I have a niche that I work with farmers in agriculture. And so this applies to anybody in general, but in particular, this is what happened. And early on, back in the early 90s, when we did planning, we'd create the trust and we'd give the clients documents to take to their local bank to put things into the name of the trust. And one afternoon, I stopped by a client's house, and on their dining room table was a stack of letters that they were supposed to give out. I said, "What is this?" They said, "That's our letters. We just haven't gotten around to it." And I scooped them up and I said, "You're not going to get around to it. I'm going to take them." And from then on, I, as a part of my practice, include the funding to be done in conjunction with the client. We prepare letters of instruction. We work with someone like yourself as a financial advisor to designate ownership of policies and accounts and beneficiaries on retirement accounts and all those different things, so that when somebody passes away, we've done the best we can to make sure that nothing or minimal goes through probate. Because the whole goal, when people come to an attorney and they want to talk about getting a trust, their expectation, like you just mentioned, is that they're going to create a trust and the trust is going to avoid probate. It's going to be private. And they will, even though they paid a higher fee up front, they know that they're saving on the other end because they'll be less involved because all the hard work's been done while they're living. The disappointment comes when the attorney might not fund it as a general practice during their lifetime with the expectation, well, that's why we have what's called a pour over will. We can do probate when they're gone and put everything into the bucket at that time. And that's what leads to the disappointment. And that's happened more than once. People will come to me. We did this with another attorney. Now we have to go through probate. Why? And then I explain, what I just said. But as far as my practice goes, if I'm going to get blamed for it, I want to have every opportunity to make sure that we did it to the best of our ability. And that includes relationships with the clients. This is not, in my practice, it's not a transactional. And I'm sure, Kevin, with you, it's not transactional, it's relational. Right. You want to have a long-term relationship. So I always tell my clients, if you have any questions, you call me. I'm not going to send you a bill for calling me up and asking a question. And in particular, going forward, if they buy new property, open up a new account, do something, get a new life insurance policy, whatever, call me and we will remind them how to properly designate it from the beginning so that it's, for example, they're buying a vacation home in Florida. They live in Maine, they're buying a property in Florida. If they own it just in their name in Florida and then they pass away, they're going to have to probate the house in Florida. By letting me know that, I can let the seller's attorney in Florida know they have a trust, and here's the name of the trust, and here's how it should be titled, so the deed goes directly into the trust and avoids probate in that state.
The power of planning, that is huge. And not too many people would know that either. They would just think, hey, we're getting a place down in Florida,
Correct. And so, it even goes to timeshares.
Oh,
because
that's
true. You can do all the planning you want, and if the client doesn't remind you about the timeshares that they have, sometimes you have to take timeshares through probate. And that makes absolutely no sense when you can, from nominal fee, typically retitle them into the name of a trust and avoid all that. Yes. And it's not just death planning we're talking about. We're talking about setting up a plan that while you're living and healthy, you're in complete control of what's going on. And I know control appeals to physicians. And if you become incapacitated, you've designated who's going to step in and take care of you financially and also making medical decisions on your behalf. And then upon your passing, we're going to be able to take care of your family, your surviving spouse, take care of your family, and also make sure that things go the way you want them to, with the minimum in fees, expenses, and taxes. I mean, one of the things we haven't brought up is the estate tax or inheritance tax, depending on what state you're in. And those are all over the board across the country. But the idea is people planning is primary, but we can build in protections so that estate taxes are minimized, or the effective estate taxes are minimized or eliminated on the first death and minimized on the second death of a couple, so that their family can enjoy the maximum amount that they are allowed to pass on.
This is to your point about trust and integrity and also relationships with clients. Who would ever thought you could have a long-term relationship with your attorney? But that's exactly what you're supposed to do. I've got clients that have been with me since 1993. Just talking to a client this morning from 1995. I just feel like I'm part of the family. I don't know if you feel the same way with your clients too, because over the years, you build that trust, rapport, the ongoing advice, the ongoing implementation of things. This particular client I talked to this morning is turning 90 in October, and I'm going, where did that time go? You know, right. But here we are sitting all of his basically adult life from 1995 all the way up till now. We've been working together like this, and this is the type of attorney you want to seek out, or a financial advisor team, because of the fact that they care about the details and the ongoing relationship moving forward. It's not just a one and done, if I could be correct in saying that, right? And you just don't make a trust and say, okay, you're off, see you later. Right. It's definitely that. So after the trust or so, or after any of that planning is implemented, how often do you review things with your client? Just as life events happen, or give us some
essentially, I remind them that life events, they need to call. If they have any question about things coming up, they should call. At a minimum, we try to do it at least every 5 years, so that, you know, things happen within that time frame. Laws change, things change. I mean, just like you said, I had somebody yesterday come in and do what we call a restatement or an update of their trust, which is like remodeling the original trust from 1996. And the laws had changed. And when we did powers of attorney and you know, in between 1996 and now, we didn't even think about digital assets or cryptocurrencies or all these other things that have come in the interim, that if we don't have recognition of those things in the documents, then institutions are not going to deal, and they're going to say, go to probate, get somebody appointed personal representative before we can talk to you. And the whole object here is to avoid that, so that we can have the successors, the people stepping in, be able to deal directly, quickly, and relatively smoothly, without having to go to probate.
And it's got to be satisfying, you know, when you see that your planning worked. You know, when you see the piece of, for the owner, the peace of mind that everything, your entity set up properly, you've got that peace of mind knowing that things are okay. Should you pass, well, the surviving family members, your loved ones, can see how that peace of mind carries over through, because everything's going through seamlessly, like you said. I remember one time when I worked at the banks, I wrote a long-term care policy for a client. And then 15 years later, I'm sitting down with them, helping them to activate it. Boy, that comes full circle. Yes. You know, when you think about, okay, here's what we did. We were all like joking around a little bit about the handwriting back then versus now, you know, but it was just one of those things where the satisfaction of knowing what we did 15 years prior is helping them activate it at that specific time, so that they wouldn't have to call some 800 number by themselves. It's just that care that you take with your clients as they move through, let alone the wealth management and wealth strategy side of everything else that we do, you know, for sure.
Right.
Just wanted to kind of back up on something that you said too. I wanted to talk about the team and the power of a team, you know, because you really talked about that. You and I are aligned in that thinking, and we have been for a long time. The virtual team especially, I know COVID made video conferencing, a thing of normality. If you had it before COVID, you were seen as having a luxury or something. But
Right.
COVID, because everybody went home, video became more mainstream, and everybody expected that, to work with their advisors. And suddenly, instead of fighting traffic, coming into an office location, it was just as easy to jump on your camera and have a virtual meeting.
Mhm.
And so the power of a virtual team, and this is what I've said, and maybe you can help me communicate this a little bit. What if the best attorney that you're looking to have this type of thing done with is in Corinth, Maine, and that might be 800 miles away from where you're sitting, versus the person on Main Street? What about the wealth advisor might be in New York and you live in North Carolina, or your CPA might be in California? The power of a virtual team is to really have the right person that understands the concepts that you're trying to achieve, that they can understand who you are, and then put you center stage. So here you are, right smack in the middle. And then before decisions are made, the team kind of collaborates on your behalf to make sure that we're looking at it from all angles, right? This is with the legal side, the tax side, the wealth management side. And when you put that together, that's pretty powerful. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
No, I think just as a basic understanding, I do legal work. All right. I'm working on settling a large estate that we got involved with updating it. And a institution, a bank, is the trustee, and we have the accountants, and we have the financial advisor. And so everybody is doing what they are good at, basically. Now add to that, like you're talking about, not just what they're good at, but the uniqueness of, in this case, dealing with physicians. What are unique situations that come up with working with physicians? There are legal situations, there are accounting situations, there are tax situations, there are wealth management situations, what's going on. And having the best people and having the ability to work with the best people, no matter where they are, is key.
Right.
And again, I think it's not ironic that people go from Maine to Boston because they want to get to the best physicians. So if you have the ability to tie into the best people in their positions, regardless of where they are in the country, to be able to do this type of planning, it's a big win-win.
Yeah, my sister-in-law, who lives in Myrtle Beach, had a very specific type of cancer in her lung, and she flew to New York City because that was literally the one doctor that knew about that stuff and had it operated on people before who have since lived 15 years later, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So she went to that specific one because of that specialty. We're no different in our professions too, because we understand physicians, we understand what your unique needs are, we understand your concerns, how to roadmap you wherever you want to go. But it's all based on, first thing, we got two of these: we listen first and speak later. And that's a lost art in some cases, where people are already ready to say a sentence back to you before you're even done communicating what you would like to say to us. So I think the thing that we really do well is listen first, and then we create from scratch. There's no pre-planned anything. It's just, okay, what is it you'd like to accomplish? What's your timeline, and how can we help you get where you need to go? And here's how you can get there, kind of thing. If I could just be real generic, but that's really how we start the process. And I know you do very well with our clients. We're very satisfied people that have come working with you. So I appreciate all that you do.
No, thank you. So one of the benefits I've mentioned to you before is that I belong to a national group of attorneys called Wealth Council. And there's probably now 2,500, 3,000 of us around the country that, if you want to work with somebody in your particular state, a physician can do that. And there are going to be those attorneys that understand what I'm describing as a way of practice. The other thing that we often do is co-counsel. People will come to me and say, I really want you to do this. And I have to explain, but I'm not licensed in Missouri or Kansas or Texas.
Gotcha.
But I have colleagues in those states that we can coordinate and co-counsel on, so that I can work with you to design the plan, and then that council in the other state can review it and make sure that it meets any of the requirements of that local state, and prepare what we refer to as ancillary documents, like a financial power of attorney or a healthcare surrogate or healthcare directive. Those things typically are unique to each state, but that ability to co-counsel is a major help, because they get the benefit of the expertise of the in-state attorney and myself or someone else who's working with them in a way that they feel comfortable. Because
Absolutely.
the biggest reason I think that your clients and I work so well together when they come to me is that it's a relational situation. We want to talk. We want to listen to what they have to say. We want to give them options. We want to say, okay, here's a way. For example, with physicians, there's more than one way to protect your assets. And some ways are quite extreme, but some people have extreme assets. You know, they may have a lot of wealth, or they may have, big houses or whatever. And there are different ways you can attack asset protection for physicians. And so what I like to know is, what are you trying to protect? What layer of protection do you have to start with? Do you have your insurances, your malpractice insurance, your liability insurance, or whatever? And then on top of that, we're going to structure entities, and we're going to make it, the goal is to make it difficult for anybody to try to pierce through to get to the individual physician's assets to satisfy any attempt at an alleged claim. Because we all know that it's not difficult to start a lawsuit, even if it doesn't have any legs to stand on, with the expectation that somebody's going to, just cave in and settle. And so that's part of the conversation is, let's start with basics. Let's deal with people, getting your practice arranged, and then looking at asset protection. And one of the areas, Kevin, that you could talk to is when physicians set up, for example, retirement plans through their practices, through their entities, they want to be sure that they're going to use a plan that's ERISA qualified. And why? Because it has protections that are built in from creditors and other people that might sue them. Am I right?
Absolutely. And the quickest way to obtain wealth is to save money through taxes, and if you can do all of these things pre-tax like that, in some cases, the pre-tax limits are huge. If you do, let's say, a defined benefit plan, or, as well as a profit sharing combination type thing. But absolutely, all of those ERISA plans would address those things, especially the asset protection side of things.
Yeah. So they're letting them save, but also in a way that's going to protect it for them and for their families.
At the same time.
That's kind of an outline of what we're looking at when we're trying to work with physicians and explain what their opportunities are to take care of themselves, their family, and their practice. And the biggest thing, I think, is that listening that you mentioned, because not everybody, whether it's attorneys or whoever, financial advisors, listen, unfortunately.
Right.
They do it the way they do it every time, or worse. Here's an example. Is my expectation or my goal is to try to explain to a client, after they tell me what they're trying to do, here are your choices. This might be a simple will-based plan that we'll use right now because of your age and position, or it may be a trust-based plan that we're going to do because we're anticipating things are going to get really good. Whereas other attorneys they might deal with that don't do relational planning, but it's more transactional, they're just going to ask, what do you want to do? All right, you want a will? We'll leave everything to your wife and then or spouse, then we'll leave it to your children, and that's it. And unless the client asks specific questions, the lawyer doesn't give them any specific
yes. That's like processing somebody, and if you're just going to go in to get your tax return done, or you're going to get some tax advice before the return is done, kind of thing too. It's the same Correct. Thought process. Absolutely. Hey, we should probably name this podcast The Hour That Could Change Your Life. We all know physicians are busy. We all know that you get phone calls from all over the place, from everybody, many different disciplines. But an hour or two of planning, just to pause, hit the pause button. Just like if you're going to cut down a tree, if you spend an extra hour or two sharpening the axe, you can actually cut down more trees, kind of thought process. But if you just would take an hour or two and do this, it could absolutely change your life. And you'll have the peace of mind knowing that your structures are in place, your entities are in place, your financial planning has been coordinated. It's not just done, it's coordinated. And that's a huge thing that we like to bring to the table. Can I ask you anything else? Anything else you want to add before we wrap up our conversation today?
No, I think we've pretty well covered the points that I wanted to be sure to make.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, let's give your information. If you'd like to share your information with us, how can someone get in contact with you for maybe further questions or so?
So my website, pauldillonlaw.com. And Dillon is Dillon, like the Marshall. And you can email me at dillaw@dillaw.com, dillaw@dillaw.com. Or you can call at area 207-285-7100. And I will say that on my website, if anyone was to go there, that not only could they book an appointment or set up a time to talk, but on my site, among other videos, I've got a video that I did for the local TV station here in Bangor. And in 1 minute and 57 seconds, I explain across my whiteboard why somebody needs a will, a power of attorney, and a health care. So at least as a starting point, younger physicians or people who think, I don't need this, at least can get a basic understanding of that. In just a minute, and I know they have 1 minute and 57 seconds.
There you go. Hey, that's a couple sips of coffee. 1 minute and 57 seconds of power like a fire hose being delivered to you by Paul Dillon. Well, that's excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today. For anyone that wants to inquire about the wealth management or wealth strategies, again, we have clients in 14 different states. And they're active clients, and we work with them very closely. We stay in touch. If you'd like to inquire about how we can help you, just reach out to us because we do this podcast as an educational service, but we also can help you on a personal note, especially if you live in one of those 14 states. I don't have time to give you all 14 right now. If you're in the state that we're not licensed in, just contact us, and if we can help you, if it's beneficial, we'll get licensed in that particular state to help you there as well. You can reach me at 716-970-4448. It's been my pleasure today to have Paul Dillon, attorney here from Corinth, Maine, join me today. I hope you found this information to be very successful to you in your thought process and your planning, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Maybe we could do this again, Paul. What do you think?
I think that would be great. There's a lot of other topics we could probably cover.
Oh, yes. Yes, we could. That's the problem, trying to keep it condensed enough for a podcast, but we could do another one. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Dillon is not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Physician Wealth Meds. Securities and advisory services are offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member of FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies and investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. That's our podcast for today. And remember, if you're not working on your personal wealth, who is? Please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues, and make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Any questions about what you heard today, please send an email to kdsullivan@lpl.com. Physician Wealth Meds, wealth medicine for doctors.